When absolute power is built on fear and bloodlines, the price isn't the throne. The price is the soul of a child. Picture this: you're a French ambassador in the year 1665, invited to the heart of Spain, the most powerful empire in Europe. You walk through the palace in Madrid, beneath ceilings dripping with gold, past chandeliers that flicker like fractured stars. Every wall whispers of glory. Every step echoes legacy. You're about to meet the King of Spain himself, a monarch who should radiate strength, majesty, the divine will of God made flesh. But when the doors swing open, the figure that enters isn't a king. It's not even a man. What steps into the throne room will haunt your sleep until the day you die. He is trembling, contorted. His jaw droops open like a broken hinge. Drool slips down his chin in long, unbroken strands. He tries to speak, but what comes out sounds more like drowning than language. His head is too large, his limbs too short. His eyes are spaced unnaturally far apart, his entire body twisted in a way that makes your stomach turn. He doesn't look like a ruler. He barely looks like a human being. They call him El Hechizado, the bewitched. But there's no magic here. No curse from witches, no spell cast by sorcerers. The horror that stands before you was born of something far more terrifying: his own blood. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to the Habsburgs, one of the most powerful dynasties the world had ever known. For centuries they ruled an empire so vast the sun never set on its lands. They were emperors and kings, popes and generals. They didn't just sit on thrones. They stitched their blood into the very borders of Europe. But behind that grandeur hid an obsession, a terrible, quiet madness. They didn't just believe in royal blood, they believed in preserving it, untouched, pure, sacred, which meant they married each other. Uncles took nieces, cousins married cousins, and when the family tree twisted too tightly, they bent it further, turning it into a spiral of incest that fed on itself for generations. From this spiral, something monstrous was born. His name was Charles. He wasn't just inbred, he was the final product of centuries of genetic self-destruction, a human body sculpted by power's refusal to dilute itself. His family tree didn't branch. It looped over and over, until the same faces stared back from every branch. When Charles was born in 1661, no bells rang, no cheering echoed across the palace walls. There was only silence, and the whispered question, "Is the baby dead?" He wasn't. But some thought he should have been. His head was grotesquely large, resting on a body too fragile to support it. His mouth hung open permanently. His eyes were wide, blank, misaligned. Midwives were sworn to secrecy. Doctors were forced to sign lies. Artists were forbidden from painting what they saw. A wall of silence rose around the infant prince, not to protect him, but to protect the illusion of power. At age 6, he couldn't hold his head up. At 8, he still couldn't walk. At 10, he finally spoke. Barely. Each word emerged like a drowning man's gasp. Wet, slurred, broken, and the worst part, he knew. He cried for hours, no injury, no hunger, just sorrow. As if somewhere deep within that disfigured frame, he understood what he was. A mistake that should never have lived. When the court finally commissioned his first royal portrait, the painter nearly refused. He later wrote to his wife that the boy's eyes were screaming from inside, like something trapped behind the canvas. Still, the painting was completed. But no amount of velvet robes, golden trim, or softened brush strokes could erase the truth. The eyes always gave it away. They stared out with a quiet, desperate plea. "Help me. They say you are what you eat." But for Charles II of Spain, eating wasn't just nourishment. It was a slow form of suffering, a ritual of humiliation, a daily reminder that his body had not been built for survival. His infamous jaw, the Habsburg curse, jutted so far forward that even when his mouth was shut, you could slip a coin through the gap. His tongue, oversized and heavy, constantly threatened to choke him. Swallowing was a struggle. Chewing, impossible. Every bite was a battle. Every meal, a performance of pain. The royal kitchen didn't serve food. It prepared survival. Stews were liquefied into broths. Meats were ground into paste. Bread was soaked until it collapsed into mush. There were no knives, no forks, just spoons and towels to wipe the mess from his chin. Still, it wasn't enough. Food spilled from the corners of his mouth. Half-chewed slop dribbled back onto the plate. He coughed. He gagged. He shook. And around him, nobles looked away. Diplomats sat frozen, appetite evaporated. One ambassador wrote that dining with the king felt like witnessing a man drown, slowly, silently, in his own saliva. Eventually, Charles stopped eating in public, not because he was too ill, because he was ashamed. And so, the king of the mightiest empire in Europe began to starve, not from famine, but from pride. He chose hunger over humiliation, chose to disappear quietly from the rituals of court life. But food was just one betrayal. Speech was another. Charles's voice was more like an echo than sound. Garbled, slurred, gurgling from deep in his throat. His jaw refused to move as it should. His tongue blocked the simplest syllables. Even those closest to him had to guess at his words, like deciphering riddles through water. In council meetings, he'd speak, and scribes would write down not what he said, but what they thought he meant. Diplomacy wasn't about translation between nations. It was about translation between Charles and his own people. In rare moments, when he could write instead of speak, his thoughts emerged as brittle as his bones. In one trembling note, he scrawled, "I am a prisoner of my own flesh, and God has made me king as some cruel jest." This was not a ruler. This was a soul, screaming through a body that had long stopped listening. His mind suffered too. Tutors tried again and again to teach him the basics: reading, math, memory, but lessons dissolved like sugar in water. Facts wouldn't stick. Logic collapsed. Emotionally, he remained a child, erratic, impulsive, frightened of change. He threw tantrums when his routines shifted. Then, just as suddenly, he'd fall into long, vacant silences, drooling, eyes locked on nothing, a prince staring into the void. As he aged, his body didn't mature, it withered. By his 30s, Charles stood barely 5 feet tall. His spine curved, his chest caved in, his arms were skeletal, his legs too weak to carry him. He leaned on furniture to move, a puppet barely held together by duty and breath. Each year, he unraveled further. His joints weakened, his back bent, his voice faded. His breath stank of something metallic, sore, like something dying from the inside out. Servants crossed themselves before entering his chambers. Some whispered prayers not for protection, but for release. Because by then, Charles didn't seem like a man, he seemed like a ghost wearing a crown. And yet, one duty remained, one expectation he could not escape. He had to produce an heir. At the heart of every monarchy lies a single truth: power survives through blood, not through gold, not through faith, but through hairs. And for Charles II, whose body was unraveling thread by thread, producing a child wasn't just tradition. It was the empire's last hope. So they gave him a bride. Her name was Marie-Louise d'Orléans, a French princess, young and vibrant, her beauty untouched by politics, her spirit still warm with innocence. She arrived in Spain believing she was marrying a king. She didn't yet know she was marrying the ghost of a dynasty. Their wedding was grand. Their wedding night silent. No one recorded what happened behind closed doors. But the next morning, Marie-Louise emerged pale and shaken, her hands trembling beneath her silks, her eyes, red from tears she hadn't meant to shed, her smile, a mask cracked at the edges. And Charles, he followed like a lost boy, confused and overwhelmed, as if something had been expected of him that he couldn't understand, much less perform. Later, in hushed tones, palace doctors would confess. Charles's body had never crossed the threshold of manhood. His genitals, they said, were underdeveloped. His voice, unbroken. His beard absent. His desires, non-existent. He was a king in title only. In function, he remained a child. But the palace couldn't admit that. Because if Charles was infertile, the bloodline ended. And if the bloodline ended, the illusion of divine monarchy, the Habsburg myth, would die with him. So they chose the easier lie. They blamed the woman. Marie-Louise was labeled barren, cold, rebellious to her sacred duty. They forced potions down her throat, subjected her to humiliating rituals. Papal doctors examined her like livestock. Her womb became a national obsession. And behind locked doors, she suffered in silence. In letters home, she described her life as a kind of elegant imprisonment. "My husband," she wrote, is more pitiful than terrifying, but impossible to love. She was 26 when she died, officially of appendicitis. But those who knew her believed otherwise, that grief, depression, and cruel medicine had done what no illness could. She was replaced quickly. The second queen, Maria Anna of Neuburg, came from a family of many children. The diplomats called her womb fruitful, as if her body was soil, as if Charles was the seed. But Charles was still Charles. The marriage yielded nothing but more heartbreak. Once again, the palace turned on the woman. She was interrogated, accused, dissected by midwives and priests, all while the truth sat beside her at every royal dinner, twisted, drooling, struggling to lift a spoon. And when reason failed, fear took over. Whispers began to circle the throne like vultures. That Charles wasn't just sick, he was cursed. No medicine had helped, no prayers had healed, so perhaps the sickness was not of this world. Perhaps the devil lived in him. The exorcist was summoned. His name was Father Antonio, a man of fire and brimstone, who declared Charles wasn't plagued by one demon, but many demons sent to destroy Spain from the inside out, hiding in the bones of their king. And so, they did what desperate empires do. They dragged Charles into the throne room, lit candles, opened Bibles, called in priests, bishops, nobles, and they began the rituals. Latin chants shook the rafters. Holy water burned on his tongue. Crushed bones of saints were dissolved into wine and forced down his throat. Crucifixes pressed to his forehead. He was made to vomit, to scream, to convulse. One ambassador wrote that it wasn't an exorcism, it was an execution by prayer. Another wept afterward, saying, "I have seen men killed in war, but I've never seen a man unmade." And Charles, he believed every word of it. He began to ask for more exorcisms. He begged for them, because deep down, Charles was still a boy who thought that if he suffered enough, God might love him, might fix him, might make him whole. Instead, each ritual peeled another piece from what little was left. And still, it wasn't enough, because by then, even the palace walls were believed to be cursed. Furniture was burned, portraits destroyed, gifts from foreign kings tossed into bonfires lit in the courtyard. Curtains, linens, holy relics set ablaze as smoke filled the Madrid sky. And through it all, Charles watched, smiling, whispering to his second wife that he felt better, that the darkness was lifting. But it wasn't healing, it was delusion, and it was almost over. On the first day of November, in the year 1700, Charles II of Spain, the bewitched, the broken, the alone, finally stopped breathing. The bells didn't ring in celebration. The city didn't sing hymns. The palace didn't erupt in mourning. It simply exhaled. He died not with a roar, but with a whisper, his last act of surrender to a life that had never been his. The royal physicians came. They performed their duty with trembling hands and terrified eyes. What they found was not a man, not even a corpse. It was a monument to biological failure. His heart was the size of a walnut, his liver black and shriveled. His lungs were stuck to his chest like wax melted into wood, his intestines tangled like twisted rope, his bladder distended, his head so swollen it wouldn't fit into the royal coffin. One doctor was said to have muttered, "This is not the body of a king. This is the wreckage of a bloodline." But no one said it aloud, because to name the truth was to destroy centuries of lies. Charles II had not died of disease, he had died of inheritance. And with him, the great Spanish line of Habsburg kings came to an end. No child, no successor, no future. Only a throne drowning in silence, and a continent bracing for war. Because that's what happens when power outlives the body that carries it. The War of Spanish Succession followed, devouring over 400,000 lives in its wake. Nations rose and bled to decide who would wear the crown that Charles could never carry. But Charles wasn't the cause. He was the symptom, the final gasp of a dynasty so obsessed with purity, so terrified of mixing its sacred blood, that it consumed itself. The Habsburgs didn't preserve their greatness, they embalmed it. And Charles, he was the coffin. His body was a warning carved in flesh. His face, a map of pride turned to punishment. His silence, the voice of nature speaking louder than all the crowns in Europe. Today, when you visit museums, when you walk past portraits gilded in gold, you might see him, Charles Sicu, staring back through centuries of paint, eyes wide, jaw slack, lips parted, not just looking at you, asking, is this what power costs? Is this what legacy becomes? His story isn't just history, it's prophecy, because even now, in families clinging to privilege, in systems built on blood and walls, the same disease hides in different clothes. They call it tradition, they call it elite. But the echo is familiar, a line that refuses to bend, a name that refuses to fade, a future strangled by the hands of its past. The Habsburgs built palaces, but they couldn't build immunity. They wrote laws, but they couldn't rewrite their DNA. They ruled over oceans and continents, but in the end, they couldn't rule over nature. Because nature waits. It doesn't punish with armies. It doesn't rage with fire. It simply lets you destroy yourself, one generation at a time, until all that's left is a boy who can't speak, can't eat, can't love, can't live, but still wears a crown.